NFL DFS Week 1. It is finally here. All season long, I am going to be giving you DFS main slate overview videos where I break down games that I am interested in targeting for stacking and one-off plays that I want from additional games. We'll do game-by-game breakdowns of the ideal plays, how to approach stacking, leverage plays to take advantage of ownership, and then value plays as well. Let's start off with my favorite game to target this week. It is Cleveland and Cincinnati. In this matchup, I actually like players from both sides, but we'll start off with Cincinnati's side first. Obviously, there is a plethora of high-end, high-upside players that you need to work into your lines this week. And this week is key because we're at the beginning of the season. Salaries are going to be a little bit flatter, a little bit more friendly, and it is very realistic to do a stack of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Burrow is 6,900, Higgins is 6,400, and Chase is 8,100 on DraftKings. I did run some lines to see what type of players you would end up with if you go that route. You can absolutely fit in a high-end running back in the 6K range, a running back in the 5K range, and then from that point, you do have to play a couple of value receivers. But this is a good week to do that because we have wide receivers with good upside sitting in the 4K range, and yes, those lines did include David Njoku at tight end as the run back. That is my preferred high-end stack of the week. Both Chase and Higgins are going to be two of the highest owned receivers, but little caveat here. Ownership for Joe Burrow is not coming in very high, so perhaps people aren't planning to stack, but rather use those Cincinnati receivers as one-off plays. Lean into it because, again, we are getting that salary increase next week. You could get creative and you could sub out Higgins for Chase Brown, but my preference there is to go with both receivers. Defensive stats season to season aren't always sticky, but wide receivers absolutely tore apart Cleveland last year, allowing an average of 30.9 fantasy points per game to opposing receivers. Oof, fourth most in the league. When we're looking at additional players in Cincinnati at the tight end position, I am not pulling Mike Gesicki into play this week. I actually did enjoy playing Mike Gesicki a good bit last season as value play at tight end, but the preseason usage from tight ends in Cincinnati was a little bit peculiar. I am concerned that the targets are going to be a little bit more spread around this tight end group. I don't want to mess with it in week one. I want to see how this plays out, particularly when his salary compared to other more reliable tight ends isn't that big of a gap. And I told you that I do like Cleveland. I absolutely would, again, run it back with someone from Cleveland. David Njoku is the preference there. Now, David Njoku is going to have higher ownership than Jerry Jeudy. So if you want to go for a more contrarian play of going with Jerry Jeudy, you can do that. But regardless, I will be playing a good amount of David Njoku. On the opposite side there, if you want to do a very ugly stack this week, and I do love a good ugly stack, Cleveland is not a terrible play. A Joe Flacco, Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku stack is very juicy. Flacco is 4,900. Jeudy is 5,400. David Njoku, again, 4,700. And Cedric Tillman there, 4,400. But I think my preference is not to include Tillman. I will say you're getting excellent value on there. So if you want to go that route, that's not an issue. It's just that there are other players around that same pricing in other games that I like as well. Now, the Bengals obviously did get their contract situation handled with Trey Hendrickson, made additions in the draft, but early in the season, I think we see a Cincinnati defense that is very similar to last season. I don't think that they did enough to make a major leap right off the bat. Tight ends absolutely ate up Cincinnati last year. They gave up the most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So again, if you're going to run a Cleveland stack, for me, it does have to include David Njoku. Tampa Bay versus Atlanta is another game that I am leaning into. We have extremely reasonable pricing on Baker Mayfield at 6,600, Mike Evans at 6,600 as well, and then Emeka Egbuka at a beautiful 4,600. Do be aware that he is going to be extremely popular, perhaps one of the most popular players, if not the most popular player, because of his pricing this week in terms of wide receivers. However, I will be playing the chalk here just because the matchup is so advantageous. Can't pass it up here. This is one of the highest point totals on the entire slate. And when we look at Atlanta's defense, they did make some draft efforts to upgrade, and I absolutely love what they did. I will not lie there. From a draft perspective, I think eventually it's going to pan out, but it'll take some time to get there. Early in the season, we should see them look very similar to last year. and they were particularly vulnerable through the air, allowing the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks and 5th most to opposing wide receivers. Tampa Bay obviously played a significant role in making those stats higher last year. Bucky Irving is slightly intriguing. I wouldn't mind sprinkling him in, but he won't be a big focal point for me this week just because Atlanta's defense was stronger against the run. And again, similar to Mike Gesicki, Cade Otton's pricing is not where I would like it to be, so I'm not a big fan this week. In terms of runbacks from Atlanta, I am not opposed to Bijan Robinson. I will sprinkle it in. He is the highest priced running back on the slate, but ownership will not be extremely high on him. Maybe around 10%. So if you want to do it, you would definitely be different if you went that route. My primary focus, though, would be Drake London at 6,500. Unfortunately, that pricing does mean that he, again, could also be one of the highest, if not the highest, owned receiver on the slate. Again, despite the status of Darnell Mooney being a little bit unclear as of the filming of this video, he is limited in practice. That is a positive sign, at least in terms of participation. But if he's not able to play, again, that just makes things even juicier for Drake London. If you were in a situation where you needed to go with an extreme value play, Ray McLeod at 3,700 would get a little bump up if Mooney is out. I'm not opposed to Kyle Pitts this week at 4,300. I just don't love the pricing. But again, if Mooney is out, I could see where he could get an uptick in volume. And then with Michael Penix at 5,600, Tampa Bay's defense being a little bit more vulnerable through the air. If you wanted to stack this, you absolutely could with Penix and London and then run it back with Mike Evans. Carolina versus Jacksonville is another game that I am interested in stacking on both sides there. The pricing for Carolina is extremely reasonable across the board. Bryce Young is 5,700, Tedero McMillan 5,200, like that. Xavier Legette 4,200. Again, he's getting that little potential boost there with Jalen Coker being on IR, probably the second look in the offense. Chuba Hubbard, a flat 6K, highest price player. No surprise there, really, in terms he's being a very reliable running back. And then Jatavian Sanders at tight end, 2,900. I would only stack Bryce Young with McMillan here. Although Sanders at 2,900 is intriguing for a punt play, I don't think it's necessary. Obviously, for a run back, the absolute smash here is Brian Thomas Jr. at 6,800. Looking at the other players for Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence is 5,300. I would anticipate him being potentially the highest owned quarterback on the slate. Then we have Travis Hunter at 5K. Hunter, again, is expected to be the wide receiver 2 there and a backup corner. We don't know the details right now of how much time he would spend on defense. Given the ambiguity, I would have expected a little bit of a salary discount on him. We're not getting that significantly. So I do prefer Thomas, despite the pricing difference being pretty significant between the two, actually. As far as the running backs go, Jacksonville, I'm not touching them. The likelihood is that we see both Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby splitting carries. It's in limited upside situation. Yes, they are appealing from a salary perspective, but I don't think you get the ceiling play from either one of them. Brenton Strange at 3,300 is interesting. I wouldn't mind sprinkling him in. For Carolina, Chuba Hubbard, just to circle back to running back, he's a little bit pricey to me at 6K. But with that said, the ownership, because of that pricing compared to the other high-end options, does mean that he is going to have extremely low ownership for that exact reason. So do with that what you will. Now, I want to look at another game in the Giants versus Washington. This is another game that I am interested in. I'm not interested in stacking it on both sides. No, I'm not interested in stacking it for the Giants. I don't think that we're getting enough discount on Tyrone Tracy Jr. either. I'm not opposed to it. It wouldn't have significant ownership, but it's not something that I'm targeting. So for the Giants, the only thing that I am interested in is just Malik Neighbors at 7K. Washington's defense didn't give up a massive amount of fantasy points to receivers, and they did make efforts to improve the defense, but at the end of the day, volume is volume. We are not getting a massive discount on Neighbors, but it is good enough for me. Jamar Chase, we talked about, highest price receiver on the slate, 8,100. So a flat 7K for Malik Neighbors, very reasonable. For Washington, your instinct is to play Jaden Daniels naked. It's not a bad instinct. But if you really want to differentiate and have a nice little contrarian lineup, you could stack there. There were times last year where I got the edge in ownership because ownership on Terry McLaurin was just so low. And we're trending that way again with him having extremely low ownership in week one. Considering the contract drama and the missing preseason, I doubt it will get hyped up here over the next couple of days. So if you were looking to get an edge, versus playing Jaden Daniels naked, you can just stack him with Terry McLaurin at 6,200. Deebo Samuel is 5,200, very reasonable pricing. I just don't know if I love his upside this week. What I do love is Austin Eckler at 4,800. Obviously, despite the fact that he does have that receiving upside, I would not stack him with Jaden Daniels. I would just isolate it to Daniels and Terry McLaurin. But in terms of Austin Eckler, I would sprinkle him in other lines just because of pricing at 4,800. I played a lot of Zach Ertz last year as a very cost-effective play in terms of value tight end. Not so cost-effective in week one at 4,100. He's way too close to the higher upside options, so I'm not super into it. Now, if you are looking for a game with potential for volume that is going overlooked a little bit because of perception of both the teams, Houston versus the Rams is the one that you need to look at. CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Christian Kirk, none of them are going to garner significant ownership, with Collins obviously being the highest. Stroud is coming in at 6K off of a year where the Texans were successful overall, but from a fantasy perspective, he was underwhelming. So I don't expect high ownership, and the value per salary is not fantastic on him. But again, if you are trying to get different at a game that could hit the over significantly, this would be the one for me. Now, Nico Collins, obviously, if we're playing CJ Stroud, we would be stacking him with Nico Collins. Pricey at 7,400, but it's interesting to me because, again, the Rams' defense was particularly vulnerable through the air compared to the run. Kirk at 4,700 was intriguing because he would see a good amount of volume, but unfortunately, he logged a DMP with a hamstring injury, so we do have to monitor that. Even if he does play, it just makes me kind of anxious that it popped up this week specifically, so play that by ear. That could be an issue because if he doesn't play, I would just lean in more aggressively into Nico Collins. It is going to raise the ownership, but it is what it is. I would not mess around with the Texans rookie receivers. I do not have any interest in Dalton Schultz, and then Nick Chubb's pricing is not ideal at 5,200 compared to other backs with higher upside. On the Rams side, it's very simple. Puka Nacua is pricey at 7,600, but he is still a fine play. Now, Devontae Adams has a significant dip in salary at 6,100 compared to Puka Nacua. That is very interesting to me. So I do like him as a little one-off play there, or a potential run back if you're going with a Houston stack and then running it back with Devontae Adams if you wanted to save on salary a little bit compared to Puka's pricing. That would be very, very different. Now, Detroit versus Green Bay, this is not a matchup that I am interested in stacking. This is more of a pulling one-off plays for me because I like the game. We've got a nice point total here. But I'm not interested in stacking it because the quarterbacks aren't exactly popping in terms of value per salary. Again, despite the game having a fairly high point total, which to tell you, running backs might be the lean here. I expect this matchup to heavily feature Josh Jacobs. It's just a terrible matchup for him, and I don't know if we're getting enough of a discount on him at 6,700, but I will not fade him because I'll say this. His pricing for projection does actually give him excellent value. And of all the value projections per salary, Josh Jacobs actually has the lowest ownership, so do with that what you will. Now, I'm not particularly interested in stacking again Green Bay. No, if I were to pull players, though, my preference would be to pull Matthew Golden at 4,900 with Jaden Reed dealing with the injury. It looks like it's trending, as of the filming of this video, it looks like it's trending towards him not playing, which would just create a nice little target funnel there for Golden in his first game as a rookie. I'm willing to jump. I'm willing to take the risk there at 4,900. Detroit's defense was particularly vulnerable through the air last season, and with the expected point total, I do think that that can be exploited. Tucker Kraft is 4K. It's not an ideal matchup. Detroit's defense was very stingy against tight ends, but again, if Jaden Reed is out, that does change things to where we could get good volume from him. On Detroit's side, everyone is priced up. 6,500 is pricey this week for Jared Goff. That's why I'm not super into it. Amon-Ra St. Brown is 7,100. Jameson Williams, 5,500. Jahmyr Gibbs, 7,700. David Montgomery, 5,700. Sam Laporta, 5K. I have no interest in Laporta at that price. Absolutely not. I have no interest in David Montgomery. The real target here for me specifically is Jahmyr Gibbs. Green Bay's run defense was friendly, right, last year. And as we've heard ad nauseum from Jerry Jones, Kenny Clark is a big part of them thinking that they can repair that run defense in Dallas. So it'll be interesting to see if we see a dip in terms of the ability to stop the run with them losing Kenny Clark. Obviously, overall, that Micah Parsons trade is a big up for Green Bay as a whole. But I do think that Gibbs is a good target here. And Detroit has said that they are trying to get more volume to Gibbs. I'm interested in some one-offs from Miami versus Indianapolis. Not interested in stacking it. Daniel Jones is 5,100. There are just better options out there with higher upside. On the Indianapolis side, Jonathan Taylor is 6,800. I like the pricing. He will be popular, but not the highest owned on the slate. And again, the line here is very interesting. 46.5 with Indianapolis being a 1.5 point favorite. That does make me lean more towards Jonathan Taylor as being a good volume play here. If I were to grab another piece here from this game, it would be Tyler Warren at 4,400. I think the salary is very reasonable. I talked about him from a fantasy perspective this offseason as someone who could be the first look in the offense. Week 1 at 4,400 is a solid time to take that risk in GPP specifically. I would not do that in a cash game, especially here because the ownership is going to be very low. So it is more of a high upside, high risk play. Josh Downs is 4,600, which is interesting for him because, again, his skill set more closely matches with Daniel Jones, right? So when we're looking at the receivers, you could go that direction. He had been dealing with a hamstring injury, but he practiced in full. Just monitor the injury report and then kind of keep your ears peeled to see if there are going to be any snap limitations for him. Now, looking at Miami, Indianapolis's defense was fairly poor across the board. Miami's offense is fairly reasonable priced across the board, and they're going to be fairly low owned because it was such a weird off season for them. So this is a game that I don't think a lot of people would be targeting. If you wanted to go that route, I'm just personally not going there. When I'm looking at Miami's players, though, Devon Achane is a player who I think is someone who we need to work with in our lines this week. He is expected to play after missing preseason with an injury. He is 6,900, which is actually 1,100 cheaper than Brian Robinson. So at first glance, it might feel a little bit pricey in first week there when we're looking at all of the other salaries, but it's a pretty significant discount. Now, I will say he is showing a little bit higher ownership percentage. Probably not the highest, but I'm still in regardless. Again, the pricing for Tua, Tyreek, and Jalen Waddle is reasonable. Not a bad stack, just not my preferred direction. In case you were wondering, Darren Waller's pricing is $3,500. Cool, but not a direction that I would say we want to head just because we have not seen him in a very long time. I would not expect significant usage from him. Now let's wrap things up with some one-off plays and position targets here at running back. Alvin Kamara, his pricing is at 6,300. Absolute steal against an Arizona defense that was fairly neutral against the run last season. Kellen Moore did come out and specifically say, since apparently I guess we needed clarity in that, I don't know why, but said that Kamara will be getting the bulk of carries. Not shocking, but I think, maybe he had to do that because there was a lot of chatter around Kamara's volume. Again, with Spencer Rattler at quarterback, I would still expect them to use Kamara heavily in checkdowns here. So we've still got that nice upside that we love for Kamara. Wide receivers, I talked about mainly every one that I'm interested in the games that we already covered. But one that I did not talk about is Ricky Pearsall, who is coming in at 4,500 as a nice value play. Juwan Jennings did just get his little contract incentive boost and will play. He's a veteran who doesn't necessarily need preseason to get game ready, but regardless, at the end of the day, Pearsall is just my preferred target here, particularly for volume. Additional tight ends, I talked about David Njoku. Obviously, we are, again, getting significant ownership. I do think he will be the highest owned tight end on the slate. But George Kittle, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, we're absolutely blessed, by the way, to have all of our big three on the main slate. That's awesome. They ain't cheap, right? The salaries are hefty. $6,500 for Bowers, $6,200 for McBride, $5,800 for Kittle. Big gap down to Laporta, and then David Njoku at $4,700. That is the reason that I am so into David Njoku and probably everybody else, just because there's such an aggressive salary gap between him and the other tight ends, the big three. The discount that we're getting, and he actually most likely specifically this week has the same ceiling really as the big three. So salary wise, it makes him a smash play. But again, that means the ownership will be lower on Bowers, McBride, and Kittle, so you can sprinkle them in as well. That wraps things up for my DFS overview video this week. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. Also, if you are interested in trying a new app for DFS, I recommend Fast Draft. I just did a DFS draft there called Flex 6 Frenzy, where you're drafting 6 flex players. They've got a ton of fun variety contests where you can get creative. You can use my promo code TERA, T-E-R-A, on Fast Draft. For a 100% deposit match up to $25. And if you need a DFS tool as well, with Player Profiler, you can get $25 off the all-in package that includes the DFS Dominator tool, which is what I use to run those lines that I talked about earlier. You can get that $25 off with the promo code TERA. But that's it. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Otherwise, I will see you guys later.